Hi, I'm Elaine West from the Sewing Basket in Plymouth, Wisconsin, where we believe a pattern is just a suggestion, and we can't wait to see what you create. I've been squaring up my flying goose blocks, flying geese, and they look pretty nice. So I have those two done, and as I go along, and I'm continuing to square them up, I find that sometimes I have a little bit of a problem. If you look at this seam right here, this piece is short. When I went to square it up and I hold my 2 by 3.5 inch line, it's a little hard to see at this camera angle, this is a little short. The corner is perfect, but it dips down a little bit right there. You can see that little ridge? That's where the pieces go together. This is often a problem with flying geese. They come out a little bit wonky. And so I'm going to show you that it's okay and how to work around that. The rest of my block is squared up, and when I put my ruler on, I've got my perfect 2 by 3 inches at the corner, but I've got that little dip in here. That's okay. I can make up that dip in the seam allowance as long as my edges are even. What I mean by that is it's going to get attached to this square. This square is straight, and when I sew this together, my corners match, but you can see there's a little, where that dip is. When I sew, I'm going to sew right across here, and I'm going to line up my 1/4 inch foot with this outer edge. And although my seam allowance is going to be a little bit shy right there, it's still going to sew straight, and it's not going to cause a problem at all when I piece my block. That was when both corners were a full 2 inches, because I can match that to a straight line, and that straight line, or that straight edge, is what I sew along. The other problem that I can have is this guy. He's got a big old short piece here, but it goes all the way to the edge. And so this side is a full 2 inches, and this one is almost 1/8 of an inch short. I can still use this block, but I have to be careful. My little personal system is I stick a pin in with the point of the pin going to the edge that's my problem. And when I go to sew this together, first off, be very careful with that pin. Sometimes I use a safety pin if I'm not going to get back to it right away. But now if I go to sew this piece, where it's short here, but 2 inches here, onto here, this is my good side. So I'm going to line this up and this edge. Those two are perpendicular. So I know that's a nice clean edge. And I'm going to take my pin out now, because I know this side is my short side. Sorry, I'm trying to get that on camera a little better. So you can see that's where I'm short. You can see the back piece popping through, but that's okay, because my 1/4 inch seam, this is going to have a short seam allowance, but it'll still be inside my seam allowance. So when I line this up and this up, I'm going to put a pin in here to hold it, and then I'm going to pin this side in place. And when I stitch my 1/4 inch seam allowance, this will still allow me to have that straight 1/4 inch all the way across. This side, both pieces will have a 1/4 inch seam allowance. On here, the back piece will be a 1/4 inch. This one will be a little scant, but that's okay. Once it's sewn, if it's sewn right along that edge, once it's sewn, you won't see that that inner seam allowance is short. And so as you trim up your geese, it can be frustrating sometimes. Oh, it didn't come out perfect. It's not square. This is the way that you can fix that. So you're looking for that short seam allowance and being sure that you're attaching it to something that's straight, and run your 1/4 inch foot right along that edge. Again, with the previous piece, where both corners or both sides were my full 2 inches, I can match those corners, and although I'm a little scant right there in the middle, my corners are fine. And again, that's going to be made up in the seam allowance. So don't get too frustrated. There's a couple tips to help you get over those humps. The other thing is, if you are nervous about it, sew with an even more scant seam allowance, scant being a little bit less than a 1/4 inch. Move your needle to the right a little bit. Think about that for a minute. Yep, and that'll make your seam allowance a little bit narrower, which will give you a little bit more fabric when you press these pieces open. If you're sewing with a scant seam allowance, when you open this, you're going to have a little bit extra fabric, and that's going to be cleaned up when you square up your blocks. So if you follow those tips, you'll get a nice block that looks like this. And if you don't, you're going to struggle with some of those awkward points and things not looking very nice. So those are some tips for flying geese.